Hello there, Atheist Jr. here, your friend and humble narrator. And today I have a very special guest on stream with me, Aron Ra. Now, for many of you, Aron needs no introduction, but some of my viewers may not be as familiar with Aron as I am. So, Aron Ra is currently on the board of directors for American Atheists. He is the director of the Phylogeny Explorer Project. He is the author of Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism, which is available now on Amazon and Audible. He is the host of the Raw Men podcast. So if you enjoy this interview, check out his YouTube channel and consider becoming one of his patrons at patreon.com/AronRa. Or if you just want to make a one-time donation, you can visit paypal.me/AronRa. So Aron, first of all, thank you so much for coming on the channel today. And how are you doing, sir?
Oh, my pleasure. I was afraid you were going to call me Atheist Senior.
Well, that could be kind of true. So
that
Aron,
might actually work.
I know you're a fellow Texan. You're in Garland, I believe, and I'm from San Antonio. So I'm curious, how bad was the power outage and the snowstorm for you? Like, how did you deal with that?
Well, that was a bucket of chuckles. Fortunately, I've got a vehicle that has four-wheel drive, big tires, and it's kind of armor plated all over. So it's like got tubular steel roll cage and all that kind of crap. So my wife had just bought a new electric car. It's like brand new, and it was only weeks old. And I'm like, okay, well, throughout all of this, we're going to be taking my car. And the way that I sold that to her was, if we take your car, it won't be a pity when it gets destroyed.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and that would have been fun trying to drive her with her little bitty tires on that kind of all. It's not just the ice. I mean, because there's nothing you can do about ice, but there's a lot of snow, and there were times when things would be packed in front of you, and there's no way. You have to be able to climb over a curb and get around things. So
right.
Yeah, I was happy to have the vehicle that I can do that if I need to.
Yeah, I was lucky enough that we only had about like 2.5 days without power, but my house got to about 55 degrees inside. So I was literally cutting down firewood from the trees in my backyard and burning old wooden furniture to stay warm.
Yeah, I foolishly I bought the house that I have at a whole different time in my life when I was very much deprived of resources, and I mean I've always been kind of struggling financially, but I mean this was a tough time for me to buy this house. So I didn't get the one that I wanted. I didn't get a fireplace, and I didn't get a lot of other extra stuff that I would normally have insisted that my house have to have a fireplace. I like versatility. I like to be able to do different things. I mean, I like I've always had like camping equipment and stuff like that. I don't have now. So it's strange that we have this outage. I've got no fireplace. I've got no wood burning stove. I've got none of the options that I grew up with. We always had this kind of, we could lose any one utility and we would still be able to go. Yeah, in other words, and I just completely lost that. And then in this situation, when they cut the power, or they didn't deliberately cut the power. Well, yeah, I think they did. They lost power to the water treatment plant in some places. So right down the street from me. We didn't have that problem here in Garland, but I'm right close to Mesquite, and in the Mesquite area, their water supply, they turned the power off to the water treatment center. So all the water was unsafe.
Yeah, and I mean, this is literally like the fault of like the conservative politicians in Texas, because if Texas had been connected to the power grid that the rest of the country is on, surely this could have been avoided, right?
Yeah. Less said about the politicians in Texas, the better.
Well, I mean, Governor Abbott is fucking up today again as well,
Oh, yeah. I just passed a law against banning abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy.
Yeah, that's
because the goal is that we want to protect the unborn, and once they're born, you're on your own. We'll toss you out in the street. Because we lead the world in death sentences, in the death penalty. We lead every country, every state that has a death penalty. We're more than double the next most lethal state. We have the highest percentage of our people in prisons. We have 1/4 of the populace, 1/4 of the children in the populace are below the poverty level. So they've cut all of the, not only have they not only did they teach abstinence only instead of birth control forever, but they also deprived these young parents, of course, because abstinence only doesn't work, right? We were leading the nation in repeat teen pregnancies. And so the conservatives also cut the benefits programs for young parents. So you keep people pregnant and poor indefinitely, further dividing the haves from the have-nots, slowly whittling away, eliminating the middle class, which was the thing, arguably, that if America ever had a greatness to it, I think the most enviable thing that we ever had was that we had a robust middle class, where just your average person can live comfortably and happily.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where a lot of other countries, you're either stupid rich or you're stupid poor, and that's it. And so you're either the 4 that ended up being rich or the 40 million that ended up with nothing.
Right. So, you mentioned that new Jeep you got, and I saw your video where you traveled to the South African Karoo on a paleontological expedition.
Yes.
Do you plan on trying to dig for fossils again? And my follow-up question is, how much did it suck carrying that huge fossil to your car or the other car?
Well, that's actually the reason I bought that Jeep.
Right.
When I was in South Africa, it was very similar terrain. It was a Permian exposure. And it's very similar terrain to what we have in the Permian Basin in West Texas, around about Odessa area. So if there's going to be another fossil dig in the Permian, where I live, then that's going to be down by Odessa, down in the Permian Basin. And the primary difference between that area and South Africa is that area doesn't have baboons. So otherwise, it's very similar. The snakes have rattles instead of hoods. That's another trivial difference, but otherwise it's the same kind of environment. And I was upset that on the last day that we were there, somebody finds this huge fossil up on the side of a hill, and has to get on a walkie-talkie to summon everybody else out there. We're all miles in different directions, wandering around all day, and so we get the message on the walkie-talkie that we've got something and it's big and we need help. So we're all it's 42 degrees Celsius. And we've been out in this heat all day. It's like 104 or something like that. But we've been out in the heat all day, and we're completely wasted. And we just want to go home and die. And we don't want to begin a dig on the discovery of this new fossil. But the frustrating thing was having to bring that fossil back to the university-provided 4-wheel drives that come on street tires. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're 4-wheel drives, but they're just trucks with the 4-wheel drive capability that run on little street tires. And they couldn't get those trucks within 2 kilometers of where we were because the terrain was too treacherous, too rocky, too steep, hills and all of that. And so once we exhumed the head, we decided there was going to be a second group that comes and gets the rest of the body, because this animal was the size of a cow. Wow. Imagine a lizard dog. It's not quite lizard and it's not quite dog, but it's somewhere in between. It's a therapsid, so it's the transition between what we traditionally used to call reptiles and what we would recognize as mammals, being neither in this case. So we find this ridiculous animal, and we're carrying just the head, and the head, I don't know how much it weighs, but it's a big damn rock, and so all 6 of us are carrying this huge rock that weighs as much as any of us. And we're all taking these little tiny steps, because we all have to walk in unison while we're all lifting on the same thing at the same time. And we're going down jagged rocks on a steep hill. Wow. Through a sandy wash, back up jagged rocks on the next hill, and then through even more jagged terrain all the way back to the cars. And so I remember saying to the director who had arranged all this, the senior paleontologist on this trip, I said, so you have 4-wheel drives, do you? And his response was, they drive on roads. Wow. So I came home determined that I'm going to buy something that will get all the way out to that fossil. Yeah. Good idea. And then the Jeep I have now, I could have gotten over all those hills, all of those jagged rocks. I could have gotten up that hill where we found it, and we could have loaded the thing in there and everybody come back comfortably.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Although
I think
not
it's a good
everybody
thing.
could ride in it. There was,
Yeah.
you could stand outside and hang onto the roll cage.
Well, like you said, it was good to have during, having to drive on the snow. Because there was one time when I was driving and I started hydroplaning just for like a second on that ice, but it's scary when you lose control like that.
Yeah, the four-wheel drive, just to make clear, I mean, I understand that it doesn't matter what kind of tires you have. It doesn't matter if you have four-wheel drive if you're on ice.
Mm-hmm.
I saw this hilarious thing where I was in El Paso one day when they had an unprecedented winter storm. What would El Paso, Texas know about winter? Right. Well, suddenly they have their bridge. There's this huge overpass bridge that is frozen up because once the bridge comes off, once the road comes off the ground where the air can go under it, now the bridge is frozen.
Yeah.
So I was watching. This was quite a long time ago. So this is back when they had the 1970s versions of the Chevy Blazer, and they would have the huge tires, and it's jacked up to the sky. Mm-hmm. Well, there's this thing on these huge tires, and I can see it on the bridge. He's like running 40s, and all four tires are just spinning like crazy as this Blazer is coming backwards, struggling to just not slide backwards. And it's the overpass is curving at the same time. So not only is going to hit cars below, but he's also going to hit the sidewall. Now, I was on the freeway myself at the time, and I couldn't see how all of that turned out, but I could see that's going to be bad.
Yeah. So, Aron, I'm really enjoying your new series about the supposed lies in the textbook, but I couldn't help but notice, is that a Bowie knife you have on your hip in those videos?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm doing this. I'm in a chair that has arms on it. Not enough room to put the knife back. Okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a 10-inch Bowie. When I lived in Arizona, Arizona was an open weapons state. So I was able to carry my axe. I could wear a sword if I wanted to. I had swords, I had axes and all of that. And somebody gave me this fairly nice 12-inch bladed Bowie that had another smaller Bowie in the same scabbard. So it's like one scabbard holds two knives. Mm-hmm. And it's funny when you can wear it. Of course, I was in my 20s at that time, so of course I'm going to wear my giant ass knife everywhere. But yeah. When you have a knife on your hip, you'd be surprised how often you need it for everything.
Yeah.
It just comes in handy all the time. So I got used to carrying it, and for the last week I wasn't wearing it very much. And the funny thing is every time I try to open a box or something, I just instinctively grab at my hip, and I'm like, damn it, I forgot to wear my knife today. So. Yeah. Yeah, my son also. My son has been wearing a Bowie knife regularly, like every day of his life for the last 10, 15 years, and so he swears by it.
Yeah. So Kant Hovind has been making response videos to your new series. I know you like to call him that, and I know he plans to do more. Do you plan on responding to these videos, or are you just going to sort of keep publishing your series as planned and kind of ignore his responses?
Yeah, well, he doesn't have anything, does he? The first response that I saw that he did to me, I didn't watch the whole thing. I only saw a couple of minutes of it. Mm-hmm. Shut up, dog! We don't have to go to DEFCON 5 just because there's a mailman. Okay. Anyway, he also goes to DEFCON 5 for squirrels. It just doesn't matter.
Oh, I used to have a Rottweiler, so I know.
Yeah, he's an enormously loyal dog, but how much he barks is crazy. He will carry on conversations with other dogs in other yards around the neighborhood, and it's frustrating, especially when you make a living doing podcasts and video recordings and such.
Yeah.
So about Hovind, he constantly refers back to his old seminar from 2005, which is like 2.5 hours long, and it's just one segment of it is 2.5 hours long, and it's one long continuous stream of absolute idiocy. It's frauds, falsehoods, and fallacies all lumped into one, and that's it for 2.5 hours. There's not a word of truth in it that is also concordant with his position.
Right.
On the rare occasion that he says something that is true, it's peripheral or irrelevant. And otherwise I would say that everything he says in there is a lie.
Yeah, something like the Grand Canyon exists. It's like, okay, well,
Yeah,
I can
granted,
grant
the
you
Grand
that.
Canyon exists.
But it's literally him concealing his position because he has to, and then accusing everybody else of lying while he's constantly lying. Like the level of irony is just, it's enough to drive you up a wall,
Yeah, and all the projection as well.
Exactly, yeah. And his new video was so full of that. And he is irritatingly, deliberately gotten everything wrong when it comes to your name. So can you sort of like correct the record and like tell the story behind why you chose the name Aron Ra and why you changed your name to that?
When I got onto Usenet around about Y2K or slightly before then, like around 1997 or so, I think, I got into a Usenet group called Talk.Origins. And that was where people were discussing the creation evolution controversy.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I kind of stumbled into that was just as you do when we were discovering the internet. We happened into discussion groups and that sort of thing, which led me to news groups where I find myself arguing with people that I can't believe that people are this stupid and that there are this many of them. I can't understand that this many people can be this dumb. And when I got onto Talk.Origins, it was very quick to ascertain. I mean, I'm talking to professional scientists on one side and evangelical ministers on the other, and it only takes a moment to realize who's got the goods and who's absolutely full of shit.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was what started me on my learning curve. I mean, I already knew. I'd already taken a course on evolution in college. I already had studied it just out of my own personal interest for a long time in my youth. But that started me on a dramatic learning curve. So from 1997 to say 2007, I'm guessing, roughly in there, I spent all of my time, both at work and at home, studying, reading everything, reading all kinds of scientific literature, reading comparative mythology, reading ancient religious texts and so forth. I read most of everything that people said you should read this. I didn't read people's whole books. When people said you should read this book by X, I didn't read the whole book by anybody, because if it's a contested position, I really don't want to poison myself with a whole lot of misinformation. So I would read a lot of peer-reviewed articles. I read whole textbooks, whole scientific textbooks. But and then eventually, it was funny. I came across this thing that Yahweh and Amun-Ra, the Egyptian sun god, which is a composite of the air god and the sun god, that there's a strange amount of parallels. And I don't remember the sources of it because it was too long ago. But there was this one scholar who was arguing that at one point there's references to Jehovah and to Amun-Ra, that they both have the same wife, that they both have this character called Atharat or Asherah, and this guy is saying that these are the wife characters for the Canaanite god and for the Egyptian god, and that this seems to be the same thing, that these religions are based off the same idea.
Mm-hmm.
And that at one point in time, Amen, who is the air god, and Ra is the sun god, they're different characters, but at some point they become composite. And this is when Amen loses the wife character. So he has the physical connection, or the connection to the physicality has been removed, and he becomes completely ethereal. He becomes a true elemental. He's an air elemental now.
Mm-hmm.
And so they combine him with the sun. They combine air with the sun. And air is really probably more significant than the sun when it comes to spirituality. Throughout the Bible, there are references to the breath of life, where the certain translations will also mean spirit. And there are in the etymology of the words come down to the close connection between spirit and air, or spirit and breath, or spirit and wind. The movement of air was considered to be spiritual. They didn't know way back when that air was made of particulate matter. They thought that air was literally spirit. And then, having that belief for a long time, people began to associate some supernatural aspect of it that was different than the physical world that they were experiencing. So that centuries later, when they finally do figure out what air is, they no longer realize that air and spirit were once the same thing in the minds of their forefathers. They now think there are different things. But when you go back to the original translations of these words, they were talking about that. They were talking about air. You know, when the Spirit of God moves over the face of the waters, they're talking about the wind.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's almost as if those original authors of the text didn't know as much as we know now.
Almost as if. It is not as if science is just now figuring out what these elders already knew. That's not happening.
So I'm predicting, this is a prediction, I can sense that Hovind is probably going to say something about the fossilized raindrops that are found at the top of the Grand Canyon in one of his response videos. I feel like he's going to say, oh, it's just common sense that those are evidence of a flood, okay?
At the wrong end of the whole. They're almost at the top. If you want to say that all of the geologic layers are a product of the flood, and the Coconino sandstone is like there's only 2 Mesozoic deposits above that, but they're thin and they're not everywhere. So there are places where erosion has made the Coconino the top. Why would the end or toward the end of this flood have the raindrops? Same place. Why would we have tetrapods making tracks at the end of this flood in Arizona? If all of this stuff was made by the flood, then the only things that walking around on 4 legs would be in Turkey coming off the ark.
Mm-hmm.
And here we have, before all of the silt is even down, we have an air-breathing vertebrate walking calmly across the sand.
Well, he still hasn't got the concept that one layer can be older than a different layer. He's still struggling with that. Which,
that's the next episode.
I would just.
I've just done episode 2. I've just done episode 2. That'll be available to my patrons for today, and then we'll go public tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And then I'm working on episode 3 after that. And episode 3 is and 4. He says some really, I mean, this is the beautiful thing about this series is Kent Hovind says really stupid things.
Yeah.
It's not just that he's dishonest. He is impressively dumb.
Yeah, he's arrogantly, confidently stupid, I would say.
How come ignorance and arrogance are always walk hand in hand? Even Darwin commented on that long before Dunning-Kruger. Darwin himself made the observation that ignorance more often begets confidence than does knowledge. Yeah. Darwin predicted Kent Hovind.
That's a great quote. So I have to thank you, Aron, for your activist work against battling Don McLeroy, who was the head of the Texas State Board of Education when I was in high school. So you've done some great work at the state capitol multiple times. And I graduated in 2007. And honestly, I had little to no evolution taught in my science classes. It wasn't until years later when I found YouTube channels like yours and Jackson Wheat that I really learned about this stuff. So thank you for that.
What I would love to see are instructional videos that are designed for public schools, where you take the teacher out of the equation. Because the students are trained by their church congregations to disrupt the class. Mm-hmm. So if the class is not allowed to interrupt the video, right, to ask they can ask whatever questions after, but we should have a standardized educational format explaining what all these things are, and then the teacher doesn't have to say whether they agree with that or they don't agree or they believe in that. So that would 20% of our teachers in the state are creationists. And my son was with one of these type teachers. They pass out the textbooks And my son is flipping through the textbooks, and the teacher is giving a lecture saying that there's never been any such thing as a beneficial mutation. My son raised his hand and says, "But teacher, beneficial mutations are listed in the textbook." They list examples of beneficial mutations. And that teacher sent my son to the principal's office. I wanted to make him famous.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah, I would have had so much fun with that guy. And all of my son's science teachers were like that. I mean, they all said really stupid things. So he didn't have, he had one decent science teacher, but most of them were just ridiculous.
Yeah, I can recall, like, not during a science class, but a history class I had where they're having the gym coach teach it, and he's literally just giving us like the test questions like a week before the test, right out of the book.
How did Texas get the idea that a gym coach can teach biology?
I'm not sure.
So
Maybe
in Waxahachie, somebody, a concerned parent contacted me saying that they live in not Waxahachie, west of Fort Worth, begins with a W. Waterford?
I'm not sure.
I can't remember. But there's a city west of Fort Worth. I think it begins with W. And the parent had contacted me to tell me that they were taking an AP class. So the child is in high school taking college courses, and the college course in this case was not being taught in the college, it's being taught in the high school. I don't know how they set this up, but the teacher obviously wasn't a biologist. They were teaching zoology, and the teacher is a coach.
Was it Weatherford?
Weatherford, there we go.
Yeah,
Weatherford. So the teacher is a gym coach. He knows absolutely nothing whatsoever about zoology, but he's going to teach it. And of course, if there's any one class where evolution is absolutely central to the entire thing, I mean, where you can't teach the class without it, it's zoology. But you have to teach that first in order to make sense of the rest of it. So instead, what he did was he arranged mock debates in the classroom where he had the students reading quotations from Ann Coulter. So he's trying to do an anti-intellectual, anti-evolution seminar in a zoology class for AP college credit. So that the only way you could get the credit from the class would be to fail the course.
Wow.
Does that make any sense? Because you have to get all the answers wrong for the teacher to pass you.
I mean, in our sort of backwards education, I guess it does make sense in a way.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I've seen so many teachers that they make an attempt, like creationist teachers will make an attempt to teach evolution, and when they do, it's disastrously bad because they have no fucking clue what they're talking about. I mean, ever. And so when you listen to a teacher who doesn't understand it right, even when they try to teach it, even when they try to be, as they thought, fair, it ends up being a horrible distortion. So there should be a standardized lesson plan. I would suggest that we do a series of videos. Everybody gets to see the same video. Everybody across the country gets to see the same video. And you have it made by paleontologists and geologists and zoologists and biologists of all kinds. And they do this instructional material so that everybody in the class can get what the process actually is. And then once they've learned what it really is and they learn it the right way, you would never, ever, 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 ever have some idiot dolt with his finger up his nose saying, but that's just macroevolution. That's not one thing turning into another completely different kind of thing.
Right.
Because that's what they're teaching. Because our teachers have no fucking clue.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were some well-meaning biology and science teachers who want to teach evolution, but even they aren't like as educated on the topic as they should be, you know?
And then even if you do, even if you are, let's say you know your stuff, you go to teach the class is primed to disrupt the class so that the children are going to disrupt the class, to argue against you because it's not that they have a right to believe whatever they want to, because they have that right. They want to never hear the opposing view. They believe in a make-believe situation that they can't allow. It's like there was this beautiful movie. It's beautiful only in one sense. It was this guy, Christopher Reeve plays this guy who falls in love with a character from 100 years ago, and he wants to travel back in time and meet this person that he in the painting that he fell in love with. And somebody convinces him that if you dress in period style clothing and you go to this old hotel that existed for 200 years and everything in the room is exactly from that time period, there's not one thing in it that's out of that time period. Just keep telling yourself that you're in that time period until you believe it. That's how religion works. Keep telling yourself the lie until you believe it. And the guy wakes up in the morning in this hotel room in these old clothes and everything, and he's back in the 1800s. And so he walks around and he finds this woman and he falls in love with her. They have a great romance and all of that. And at one point he reaches into his pocket for whatever reason and pulls out a penny, only it's a penny from 1987. And seeing the date 1987 and realizing that penny came from the wrong decade, wrong century, yanks him back in time to now. That's how religious belief seems to work, where people want to convince themselves really, really desperately, keep lying to yourself, believe hard enough. And if you ever see anything that goes against that, it'll completely harsh your buzz and ruin your fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it is. It's a fantasy, and they can't allow listening to the facts and then choose to believe otherwise. And they don't have any facts of their own. So they have to pretend that everybody else is in a belief system too. So I think that all religion is literally make-believe, and that God is not like having an imaginary friend. It is having an magic imaginary friend. That's exactly what it is. It's not similar to, it is exactly that.
I agree. Well, that is definitely how some religious people are. Although there are people like Kent Hovind where, this person sees the coin in the movie and that sort of makes his whole delusion come crashing down. But with people like Kent, like you can present them evidence and the delusion, it just stays, like it's like a fixed belief.
Yeah.
They don't want to challenge people's fixed beliefs. So
and I don't understand why people have fixed beliefs. The very idea that you can have a fixed belief is an admission that you have a closed mind, that you don't care what the truth is. And I don't understand why people don't care what the truth is. But that's the society that we live in now, where if you just where you imagine your own truth. I got into a debate with I got into an argument with a seminary professor. And he seemed to think that everybody has their own, that nobody can ever objectively verify one side over another on anything. Nothing, not one single thing ever in conceptual reality can ever be objectively verified in this guy's mind, because that's my reality and he has his own.
Was that on your channel? I think I saw that video.
Yeah, he seems to have his own. He thinks that we all have our own reality.
Yeah, that guy was like unbearably smug.
Oh, yeah. Well, I have a PhD, and that means that you suck ass. Pretty much the content of the discussion.
Yeah. So, Aron, I know you're a big proponent of the term epistivist. Can you define that? And also, how can I become one? Because it sounds neat.
Well, there's a ritual and a training period. Yeah, so epistivist was a word that was invented by, and a strange thing is that I saw this thing in Star Trek where they were talking one day about all these cultures that developed the spoken language first, except for this one weird one that developed the written language first. Kind of the same thing happened here. I wanted to develop a symbol for people who have no faith at all. The symbol just represents people who don't believe anything on faith. But I didn't have a word to describe that. And then Bionic Dance on YouTube came up with the word. She said apistivist. That is somebody that that she was thinking she was conjugating it correctly, and I think she did.
Mhm.
That of course, what do I know? I don't speak Greek, but anyway, she comes up with she says it's apistivism is one who won't believe anything on faith. You can expand that a bit to say that that we understand that if you just that faith is not a reliable path to truth. So if any belief that requires faith should be rejected for that reason. If faith is required, then there's obviously no truth to it.
Well,
Because if
if
you
you
had
had,
truth to it, you
yeah,
wouldn't need faith.
right. Yeah, it's like faith is something, I had the pleasure of talking to Mr. Batman recently.
Oh, you call that a pleasure, do you?
No, I don't. And he asked me what faith was, and I told him that Mark Twain said that faith is believing what you know ain't so. And
My
I don't think
favorite
he
quote
liked
from Mark Twain.
I don't think he liked that answer.
Yeah, and I always pair that. I've got a meme that I created that has Mark Twain on one side and Friedrich Nietzsche on the other. And where Mark Twain says on the right hand of the frame says faith is believing what you know. So Nietzsche says faith is not wanting to know what is true. And I believe both of those quotes are correct.
Yeah. And I think Nietzsche also said that God is dead, but I don't think God was ever alive in the first place.
Yeah. I went into somebody's house sometime in the 90s, and it was a bunch of goth metalhead weirdos, punk people, and they had this poster that said "Kill God and fuck the corpse."
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And while I can appreciate the emotional sentiment behind that, logically, I can say there's a whole lot wrong with that. God is literally a magic imaginary friend, and that's it, and that's all. God is that we don't understand what air is. Oxygen theory was devised. What was the guy's name? Antoine de Leverrier in the late 1700s, around 1790. He comes with oxygen theory. If we'd had a clue, if we'd had oxygen theory 2,000 years earlier, we wouldn't have the religion now.
Well, I think that replaced like phlogiston, right? Like
exactly. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they had a bunch of crazy medieval medicines back then, like the four humors and the ether and all this stuff was just completely wrong. But alchemy and even stuff that like Isaac Newton believed in, some of that's like alchemy. But I had a question about have you ever considered releasing updated versions of your foundational falsehoods of creationism videos? Like, I love those videos, but they're like a decade old, right?
They are, and this is when I was still at the early end of that learning curve. So there are things in there that need to be updated, and there are a couple of things that need to be corrected. So I would like to do a second edition on my foundational falsehoods of creationism book. There's only 2 errors I can think of off the top of my head, and they're not really a big deal, but I don't like having it when realizing that, no, that's not right. It was actually this. Mm-hmm. I want to go back and fix that. So.
Well, I listened to the audiobook version that you narrated of your book, and I thought it was excellent.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Yeah. No problem.
I like doing voice work on occasion. I said that, and somebody said, "Would you voice a cartoon for me?" And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, sure. That sounds fun." And then I read the cartoon. I shouldn't have agreed to it before reading the cartoon. I'm like, "No, fuck, I'm not going to do this."
Yeah. Seeing your speech on the 10 Commandments, it did make me wonder if you'd ever considered being a voice actor, because I love that video. It's really hilarious.
I would love to do voice acting. Once upon a time, I was pretty good at doing most of the Simpsons voices. So unfortunately, when you age, your voice goes, and I'm already losing a little bit of that range. So I can't do some of the characters I used to be able to do.
That's a shame. So, and speaking of those those videos, I think one of the highlights of the foundational falsehood videos was just a simple animation of phylogeny portrayed using like a Windows Explorer tree of folders. And I think that was like a big inspiration for the Phylogeny Explorer project. So can you tell us like what's the status on that? Like I know you mentioned you wanted to get it peer reviewed recently.
Yeah, the Phylogeny Explorer project is on its fifth database since it was originally designed. And we keep building it up to something that, okay, well, this time this one will handle the load. Only the last time we decided we were going to integrate a number of other websites that were also doing trees for current species. And we thought, instead of doing, because we had been doing for like 5 years, we had been doing manual entry from a couple dozen data entry volunteers, following peer-reviewed articles. You know, we would compare peer-reviewed articles and make sure everything's supposed to be where it's supposed to be. And then at some point, somebody got the idea of there's a way that we can do this as a single swoop. Funny thing is, when they say that there's a way that we can do this easy with a single punch of a button, it only requires a year of writing code to be able to push that button.
Mm-hmm.
So we were going to bring over 2.6 million species from I think it was the EOL. I can't remember the name of it. I can't remember what EOL stands for, but it's another website that does only extant species. And of course, we're doing all of the fossil forms as well. And so we had been doing, all of our people were entering data by going to fossilworks.com and finding contradictions in fossil works where something would be listed in two different places, for example, and that sort of thing. So we're having to reconcile those errors and come up with one tree that fits everything. And when we get this where it'll actually work, it's just going to take us about a year, and we've been working on it for 4 or 5 months. And then we will have millions of species, and it required a new database because even the old robust one wasn't going to handle this much data all at once. So
I believe EOL was Encyclopedia of Life.
I think so. Yes.
Yeah. I've noticed from watching like your video at the Ark Encounter with Eric Hovind, and like I said, your speech about the 10 Commandments, that you can be quite funny, Aron. And I've tried to make content that makes people laugh as well. So what do you think is like the value of injecting humor into atheist activism and content?
It really helps.
I agree.
It really does. I mean, if you do dry lectures, it doesn't matter how factually accurate it is. The reason that we're not connecting with people is because a lot of the people we're trying to reach literally do not care what reality is. They are incurious. They don't want to explore new horizons. They don't want to improve understanding. I don't understand that mindset.
Well, they don't want to be challenged.
I don't get that. I mean, I had somebody tell me to my face that if it doesn't directly affect how much food I have on the table, I don't want to know it. I can't imagine having such a shallow existence.
Well, that's, they're being presumptive, because they, what if they're missing out on an opportunity just because they think, oh, this doesn't affect how much, my bottom line is. But, learning a new skill or getting educated could, increase that. But, those people are very closed-minded, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Aron, you've collaborated with some very well-known physicists before. What are some highlights of your career on YouTube so far?
Highlights of my career in YouTube. I'll tell you what. I'll give you a personal one.
Okay.
Because I mean, I've said most of the other things we've said. I've said to a bunch of other people, but
okay.
But this one I don't think I have.
I appreciate that.
When I was growing up, my father, my stepfather, my older stepbrother, and all these men in my life were constantly telling me that I was never going to amount to anything, that I was going to be a perpetual loser, that my stepdad told me over and over and over again throughout my youth, from 11 years old to 20 something, he was always telling me that it doesn't matter what I ever do, I was never going to amount to anything. You might be the world's greatest ditch digger, but that'll be all you ever can do.
Wow.
I can't imagine why anybody would tell somebody that you're going to be a failure at everything, no matter what.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it was, and he was just an evil, hateful, kind of a spiteful guy. And when he died, I toasted his death. Yeah, and
Hey, there are some people that I'm not going to feel bad about them leaving this mortal coil, like people who refuse to vaccinate themselves or, wear masks or anything. To me, if that person dies, that's one person who doesn't have the opportunity to infect an old lady or a child that has an immune system deficiency. So I'm not really going to feel bad because they had every opportunity to get vaccinated. Like, I've gotten both vaccines, and that's just how I feel about it.
I was lucky enough that when I was despite the grotesque visage you may see now, when I was a young man, I was pretty good looking. I mean, I would walk into a party.
I've seen pictures, Aron. I've seen pictures.
I would walk into a party and be lucky enough to walk out with the prettiest girl. That kind of thing was common. So I had that going for me. But when I stepdad, I remember when I was in high school, I was dating a Japanese girl, a Mexican girl, and a black girl, all at the same time. Okay. And when my stepdad found out about that, he was livid, and he's criticizing me because I'm not staying in my race. Oh, and he was so big into that. Most of the people in my family have been exceeding races, but he was the pinnacle of all of them. And I just couldn't understand where you come from. He kept telling me that I needed to read Mein Kampf.
Oh.
Yeah, I did read Mein Kampf. I got a completely different take out of it than my stepdad did. So anyway, the point is that while he's telling me that I'm never going to amount to anything and everything I do is wrong, and that I was never, I had a friend who had whose father had $1 million, whose father was worth more than $1 million in the 1970s.
Oh, wow.
And so I was told not to be friends with that guy anymore because they were at a different class. And the irony was that he told me, my stepdad told me that my friend wouldn't respect me, so I should not be his friend because he's not going to be my friend when he realizes the disparity between us. I'm like, are you not describing what you just told me yourself? The hell's wrong with you? So as a result, I was under the impression that I was never going to be I was never going to get off this continent. I was never going to see any part of the world. I was never going to be able to do anything of interest. And you asked me what were the highlights of my channel, of my activism. And until COVID, I had actually done quite a bit of travel.
Yeah.
There are 2 time zones in the world that I haven't been to.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, one of them is Bangladesh, and the other is Thailand. Or, I'm saying time zones, but where Bangladesh and where Bangkok are.
Yeah.
Those 2. And for obvious reasons for Bangladesh. And you look at that whole time zone, where would I go in that whole time zone? And I'm very, very lucky that I had a decade or so of travel like that. And I don't know that in a post-COVID world that things will pick up to the way they were. I can't really imagine that happening because it was kind of crazy. When COVID happened, I had to cancel 3 international trips to countries I'd never been to before. So that was really nice. And so I'm glad I was able to do that. When I was a child, I remember I had Nordic ancestry. And so I was kind of fascinated with Vikings. And I remember reading these things about the Osberg ship in the Oslo Museum. And I remember lamenting that I was never going to be able to see that ship. I was never going to be in fucking Oslo. Yeah. And then 5 or 6 years ago, I'm in Oslo. I'm in the museum. I'm looking at the Osberg ship. Wow. Personal. It's just me. I did something my whole family had never done that they all insisted I would never do. I was going to be the loser of my whole family. I'm the only one in my family to go to college. I'm the only one in my family to voluntarily not be drafted or not, not with the military. I was the only one in my family to get a passport and travel the world when it's not a requirement of business.
Right. Or the military.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I haven't been to South America yet. That's the only one I've got left apart from Antarctica. And now I know a half a dozen people who've been to Antarctica, so I've got to find a way to get there.
Yeah, I was watching some really interesting YouTube videos about like the scientists that are down there and what they're doing, and like the biodiversity there, the animals, like the fish, and like the antifreeze properties they develop. It's really incredible.
Yeah, I'm really delighted that that I can contribute to science, actual science. That I'm still an undergrad. But but the reason I was in South Africa is I was invited by the paleontology department of the University of the Witwatersrand. I have friends a bunch of friends now whose names are Professor blankety blank PhD.
Right.
And who am I? So when I go on this expedition in South Africa that you started this thing talking about, I'm with 10 other guys, all of whom are named Professor blankety blank PhD. And then there's me.
Representing America.
Yeah. And it was all I could do not to step on my tongue when I'm talking to people who are the foremost experts.
Yeah.
And the whole time I'm there, I'm like, I can't believe I'm here. That they invited me because they said that the paleontology department were fans of mine. The whole department.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I was very pleased. So I wish that my father had stayed alive long enough to see it.
Yeah.
I really kind of would like my stepdad to have seen it.
I know what you mean.
Yep. But so that's the personal aspect.
Well, yeah. Thank you for sharing that with me. And I'd be remiss if I had a couple more questions, but I want to make sure I get this one in before we run out of time, because the time is really flown by. But yeah. One of my biggest inspirations for making my channel was the late Bill Ludlow. If you don't mind, could you maybe talk about some of the memories you had with Bill, or just who he was to you as like a friend?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I was just doing this series on where I have to reference Grand Canyon quite a lot. I have to talk about the paleontology and geology of the Grand Canyon, and who was my first person to tap on that. Bill Ludlow worked the Grand Canyon. He himself discovered some of the fossils that I'm referencing now. Mm-hmm. So it was sad that he parted. He called me a day or two before he died. I mean, who does that? I mean, he called me to tell me that he was dying, that he didn't want to make a public statement about it. Who does that?
Yeah, it was a shock to me, because I guess to most people, because we had no idea. Yeah.
So he called me to tell me that I don't really want to tell you this, but I'm going to be dead soon. I'm and the conversation was like that. I don't remember exactly how he phrased it, but he said that he wanted to give me his library, that he wanted to just have his people box up his library and send it to me. And he wanted my permission to do that. And you never get a call like that. I mean, hi, I'm about to die. I want to give you my library.
Right. Well, usually it would be like from a family member, but I think Bill, he treated friendships he made on the internet like they were somebody he knew, in real life for 20 years. That's one thing I noticed about him.
Yeah, and he and I had only ever been out, like just the two of us personally, one night. I was out in Phoenix and he was DJing. He used to DJ.
Yeah, the Dirty Goat Productions, I think it was.
Yeah. And so I remember sitting in, basically I'm sitting in a bar. I think it was a tavern. It also had food. And while he's playing the music and everything, and then he would take, he would have breaks and sit and have a beer with me and chat and everything. Because I don't get to get out to Phoenix as much as I would like. I have some dear friends in Arizona, and I spent a lot of my youth there. So I like to go back when I can. But I lament lament his passing, especially when I have something like this come up that just forces me to, what, I don't have that resource anymore.
Yeah, I saw you made a Facebook post about that. This is a person that I would usually turn to in this type of situation because Bill was so easy to talk to and he was very knowledgeable.
What was your connection with Bill?
Well, I was just a fan of his channel, and then we posted on some of the same Facebook groups together, and we were friends on Facebook. And I messaged him after I saw his debate with Kent Hovind and just told him how I thought he had done such a great job. And then we just sort of got to talking in the messenger. And one of my best memories of Bill is that I had a close friend in the hospital getting brain surgery. Actually, I posted that status on Facebook, and he was the very first person to like the status before any of my friends and family. So that just showed me the type of person that he was. Yeah,
he was a great guy for reasons I didn't expect. And as I said, when it comes my time to die, will I have dignity enough not to make the announcement? Will I be able to keep that shit a secret? and only call it, hey, I want to send you a whole bunch of books. Do you mind? Is it worth it? Do you want these books? Yeah. What a strange conversation to have.
So he actually had those sent to you?
Well, he wanted to.
Oh, okay.
For whatever reason, after his passing, those books never arrived, and I just never made a big deal of it because what's the point? Yeah.
He was somebody who was very funny too. Like some of his content was really hilarious, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I like having I like having the connections. Some of the connections that I've had that have been very rewarding. I spent my whole life until I was 40 something. I think I was 40 years old before I ever met a famous person.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of thought at some point that I would. Because the way my family had raised me, I just always thought I was going to die in absolute obscurity. Yeah.
Well, that kind of mindset, when it's sort of drilled into your head like that, it can be hard to break free from that. That sort of self-doubt.
Yep. I remember when I said at one point I wanted to buy a Harley. I found a Harley that I could afford at the time, and I happened to mention to my brother, I'm going to buy this Harley. And he said, "You can't buy a Harley. You don't know anything about it. You'd never be able to handle it. You can't. You need to be a mechanic. You don't know anything about it. You'd be a complete waste of time. You'd end up spending all this money, and then you'd spend all this money having somebody else fix it." That's the kind of negative reinforcement I got. Someone offered me a job as a truck driver, and it was paying really well, and I was like 19 years old, and they were offering me the job. It's not over the road, but it gives you the experience to get an over the road thing. So I was 19 and somebody offers me a job truck driving, says, hey, I need a driver. If you can drive, I'll let you drive for my company. Again, my stepdad and my brother are both telling me, you ain't no truck driver, because a truck driver is a man's job, and you what the hell are you? Who says that to a guy, right? I mean, my dad was constantly, my dad was so, you had to be a man among men. You had to be, other men have to be afraid of you. This is the way he talked. Mm-hmm. He told me, I came to visit him one time, and he said that I'm going to fly out the next day. He says, don't fly out tomorrow. Wait 2 more days. Rebook your flight. Back when you could do that. So I call the airline and say, and I'm talking to a customer service person. I say, yeah, I'd like to reschedule my flight if I can, please. And I said the word please. I'm being nice to a customer service agent on the phone. Mm-hmm. And my dad couldn't handle that. And he hauled off and hit me while I'm on the phone, telling me, you grab the world by the throat and make it give you what you want. You don't ask for nothing. So.
Yeah, that's a very archaic, I think, way of being a masculine person. And I'm glad to see that hopefully like my generation will not have to deal with that type of thing that you had to go through, Aaron. So I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, when people mention toxic masculinity, I'm like, really? What's that?
Yeah, I didn't want to say it, but
Yeah.
it does come to mind.
Yeah. So, but I remember once upon a time I had been conditioned by this upbringing of this, that you had to be this super uber macho, all of that. And I was told and conditioned to believe that I was supposed to react in fear and violence, a strange combination of both. Should I ever meet a gay person? And I remember how I got over that. I was hitchhiking. Again, I think I was 19, maybe 20, maybe it's 20. And I'm hitchhiking, and this guy comes. Two cars come to pick me up at once, and one of them is a '68 Camaro that slides to the side of the road, and the door opens, and one of the guys falls out on his back on the road, smoke all over the car, and the guy's lying in the street giggling. These guys are obviously ripped to the gills, and this other car, is conservative older gentleman with a beard. Right. And he's right next to me. So there's like all kinds of things to make the decision. Well, this guy's sane and sober. Those guys are nuts. They're not going to live through the evening. So I get in this guy's car. We start into the road. We're not even up to highway speed yet. As he's pulling out onto the road, he says, "I'll tell you that I'm gay." And I screamed like a girl and jumped out of a moving car.
Wow. That's certainly a fearful and violent reaction. So
now, when those guys came to pick me up was at dusk. I was in Tucson, Arizona, and the sun is now down. I walked end to end of Tucson, Arizona. I walked to the other end, back out into the desert, out of the city, before I caught a ride again the next day, thinking all night long, what was this guy going to do to me? What could he have done to me? What the hell was the issue? And I was completely over homophobia, absolutely cured by next morning, when I reanalyzed everything I'd been taught in my life about that kind of reaction, and how stupid was all of that.
Well, I actually had a discussion with somebody on my channel about something similar to this, and I said that, in my opinion, the more that you educate somebody, including about evolution, the less likely that person is to hold bigoted beliefs. Do you agree with that sentiment?
The better word than bigotry, because bigotry is an intolerance of other views, and you are talking about that. But the better word in this case is prejudice, which is to prejudge. And that's what people do when they don't understand what they're talking about. They make judgments about things they don't understand.
Right.
So the more you understand it, the less your prejudgments value. And they don't mean anything anymore once you understand what the real matter is.
Yeah, and people usually react with fear to things that they don't have an understanding of.
Yeah.
Well, Aaron, I think we've hit about the hour mark. I guess, do you want to sort of wrap things up? Is there anything you wanted to say before we wind things down?
Oh, no, thank you. We are good. I can't, it's we're still in COVID. And I would normally at this point will say, well, I'm going to be here and here and here. But no, that's not happening anymore. So maybe in a few more months we will.
Yeah, it makes me sad, because I feel like, I would love to see the unholy trinity reunite again, but that probably won't be for a long time.
Yeah.
Because before, I know that you had come to San Antonio, but this was before I knew about your channel, and I was kicking myself that I didn't get to see that when I had the chance, because that would have been great.
Yeah, I used to live in San Antonio once upon a time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, not hugely fond of that city.
It has its ups and downs. If you live in the right area, I think it's fine. But
yeah, I've been to the right area. I have friends in San Antonio. They definitely live in the right area. But that's a long way from where I lived when I lived there.
I see. Yeah, I
Yep.
know what you mean. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Aron. Thank you for coming on, and just thank you. I can't thank you enough for doing this.
Well, thank you for taking the time and pain necessary to sit through Hovind's ridiculous attempts. Oh yeah, where he one of the things he criticized me, he tries to criticize my name with made up reasons he can't understand. And did I ever answered that question? I never answered the question why I adopted the name Aron Ra. I realized that Amun Ra and Jehovah had very similar backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
And so my name's already Aron. I needed just 10 seconds to think of a user handle for talk.origins, Aron Ra. I wanted to call attention to the similarities between Amun Ra and Jehovah, which is a combination of a volcano god and an air god and a sun god. Sorry, It took an hour later to get around to answering that question.
Well, I'm sure that Kent will see this video and he'll never call you Larry again.
Oh, yeah, that'll happen. All right. Thank you much, sir.
Yeah. Okay, Aron. I'm going to end the stream, and thank you guys for watching. If you want to check out Aron's Patreon, it's patreon.com/Aron Ra, and mine is the same. It's just patreon.com/atheistjunior. So thank you guys so much.